Okay, we're recording. So, as I was saying, I find these podcasts a great excuse just to get to know my friends, old and new, better. And I love that what brought us here. So, this is my new dear friend, Samir, who's the boyfriend of my ex-girlfriend. And I think that this is like points to an amazing feature of living this new kind of paradigm of relationships, which is much more fluid, much more less boundary defined. And it allows for these kind of friendships. Like I found early on that I this is different because obviously Nastasia and I aren't lovers anymore. But even in situations where you're sharing a lover, it's amazing the way two people who would previously have been seen in an antagonistic roles to each other, kind of by default, as competitors.
Right.
And this does often translate into like, you know, exes and like, you know, people get really wary about people hanging out with their... Someone ringing the doorbell?
Yeah, I guess so.
It's okay. Let's have interruptions.
No, but I do agree with you, Tal. There was this previous approach of people throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as it were. And I mean, what is your crime? Your crime is that you have the same taste in women that I do.
Right.
Why should I hold that against you?
Right.
We had the same taste. And so I used to be of the old paradigm, of course, of, you know, the ex of my girlfriend is some sort of competitor. I've learned to realize that these men actually have a lot in common with me, not just their taste in women, but values as well.
Exactly.
And you and I are actually a perfect example of that. The more I've grown, the more I've gotten to know you, the more I've grown extremely fond of you.
Same.
And so it's I think a lot of people, unfortunately, for whatever reason, going back to that metaphor, we do throw out the baby with the bathwater, and there's just no reason to do that. You know, we can all have these like beautifully multidimensional relationships and connections with each other as we are right now, as we're doing right now. And the complexity of it is actually a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for me it started with making this film Monogamish. We met a couple like 4 years into making this movie, and kind of all of the unearthing all these. Have you seen the movie?
It's funny you talk about this because my ex-girlfriend is Veronique Pittman.
Yeah.
And I know that she had a hand in it. She had mentioned that I should watch it. So
you really should if you haven't. But I you know, there was a couple that we met towards the end of making this film, and I ended up having this very beautiful love affair with the woman in the couple, and I'd studied this theoretically for several years but hadn't lived it yet. And her husband called me like the day after we were together the first time, and he's like, "Oh, I heard you guys had a lovely evening. Let's have lunch." And I was like, "Okay, I haven't actually tried this before, but okay, let's, you know," I was nervous about it, but we found very quickly that we had so much in common.
Right.
And in fact, now I'm as good friends with him as I am with her.
Right.
And years later, and our relationship has evolved and has become platonic. And it's just, when two people love the same person, that signifies
there's
something.
a sign there. Yeah, exactly. It's a sort of if you just go in that situation a little deeper, you'll realize that it just unlocks all these other things that this guy actually has that you really like as well, because that guy sort of is a mirror to you, but this common denominator, which is just, you know, this beautiful woman that we both fell in love with. And
I think it's not a coincidence that obviously Nastasia has a type in a way, I think, and I think, you know, the things that we share, obviously, we both studied philosophy, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I think the philosophical mindset is by its disposition tends towards questioning prevailing
mainstream
ways
thinking.
of looking at things.
That's right, from Socrates onwards.
And so tell me about your background in philosophy. Like, how did you get into it? Where did you study it?
Yeah.
How did you, because we also both like didn't go into academic philosophy. We then like took philosophy and I think applied it to the way we live our lives,
Yeah,
right?
I did study philosophy and law in England, at Oxford, and I was really drawn to the classics. I think if I could be mistaken, but I notice when you speak of philosophy, you're more into the contemporaries, and I'm deficient there. I'm more I'm more knowledgeable on the classics, especially ancient Greeks, and as you know, philosophy is a Greek word, love of knowledge.
Yeah.
So I was trained formally at that level. I feel that the contemporaries they're not, I'm not saying they're derivatives or iterations of what has already been said, but I do think there's an argument for that.
Let's back up a bit. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Sure.
I want to learn.
I'm a bit of a mixed puppy, really.
Yeah. Another thing we share in common.
Are you not fully Italian?
No, half. And then I was born in Thailand, so I'm very much a mutt.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I was born in Canada, in Montreal. My father is Palestinian. He's from Nazareth. He had to leave that country because there was a lot of tension, obviously, a lot of conflict. My dad, being from Nazareth, is a Christian Palestinian. So most Palestinians are Muslims, but there is about 20-25% of Palestinians that are Christians.
That many? Oh, that's a huge percentage.
Maybe it's around 20%.
Yeah.
And they're mostly from Nazareth and Bethlehem. And my dad's from Nazareth, and he left in the late 60s. He watched a lot of Humphrey Bogart movies. He had a dream to come to the United States, and he learned English, actually, through those movies. So when he spoke a little bit like Humphrey Bogart. It was really funny.
Amazing.
And he wasn't accepted as a refugee into the United States. There was an easy refugee program in Canada. So he went.
What year is this?
I believe 1968.
Okay. And your dad was born in when?
He was born in 36.
36.
Yeah.
So he he was in.
Oh yeah, he was born in Palestine.
Right.
I still have his birth certificate.
Oh wow.
It says state of Palestine. There was a Palestine.
Yeah. No, a lot of people contest this.
Yeah.
For some
it's really
strange reason.
Yeah.
We can get into that.
Yeah.
No comment.
No. I could comment.
Yeah. What do you say? Let's take a little detour. What do you say to people who say there was no such thing as Palestine?
I mean, I think that's the ultimate form of racism, to just even deny your existence.
Yeah.
I think that's morally wrong. And it's a shame that there are two sides. I don't think there are any sides really. We live in a sphere, so it's a bit strange that we think that way.
Good.
And that the conflict between the Arabs and the Jews is really unfortunate, because we're actually children of Abraham. We're actually related technically. Yeah. And so
Semitic, right?
We're Semitic. So Palestinians are Semitic people. Jewish people are Semitic people. And being a Semite basically is, there is this religion that was born in the desert, and that was in the Middle East, and it was Judaism and Islam, and to a degree, I guess, Christianity as well. These are all religions that were born there. They're not religions that I'm particularly enamored by completely.
Right.
If Jesus saw what was going on in the Catholic Church today, for example, in his name, he probably would be very confused, to say the least.
Nietzsche said the last Christian died on the cross.
That's funny. That's funny. And if you think about it, like one of the first Christians was actually
true Christian, let's say.
Mary Magdalene, who was a prostitute. These right-wing Christians in America really seem to forget the genesis of how this all started, and that Christianity was really just basically an ancient hippie movement at the time. But anyway, I think I digress. So my father's from Palestine.
Away.
My mother, he came to Montreal, and he met my mother at a train station. He saw her. Yeah.
Wait, I want to back up a little. Do you know much about your dad's life in Palestine?
Yeah.
And when it became Israel, he was there. Like, do you know what he went through at this time? And
yeah, he went through trauma.
Can we talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. So we had there were 6 kids.
He was one of 6.
He was one of 6. One died from a missile, a bomb.
In 48.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And that was his sister.
Wow.
And
how old was she?
apparently in the single digits.
Wow.
It's not talked about very much.
Yeah.
And he wasn't able to go to school. He had to survive. He worked as a car mechanic starting when he was 7 years old. My dad was barely literate, and he barely knew how to read and write. And he just after being a car mechanic, he was basically most of the times when he was there just to survive, he had to pretend to be Jewish. He did that because there was racism against people who were not Jewish at the time. And he was, he just got a little bit tired of pretending to be somebody who he wasn't, and came to Canada hopefully for a more open society.
What year was this? In 60s, you said?
In 68.
So there was decades though in between.
Yeah.
So he was born in 30, so he was about 30 years old.
I think in his late 20s or something like that. That's right. And him and his brother took a boat, came to Canada, came to Montreal, and they almost left after the first winter because they thought it was ridiculous, the winter.
Yeah.
I could understand that. It's one of the reasons why I left Canada 30 years ago. So he met my mother, who's partly French Canadian, partly Native Indian, from the Iroquois tribe.
Mm-hmm.
So I have, I guess I'm a mixture of three peoples that did not get their nation. So the French Canadians who didn't get their nation, the Native Indians who lost their nation, and the Palestinians who lost their nation.
Wow.
So I was born in a country called Canada, that's hardly a country. And
why do you say hardly a country?
I feel Canada is not. Well, first of all, fortunately, it doesn't have the deep patriotism that certain countries have, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah,
because that's jingoism.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy for that. However, I do think that Canada is a nation of two countries. There's a French Canadian side, and there is a Protestant English side, and those two peoples were sort of forced to be together. If things were natural, Quebec would be its own country, and the rest of Canada would be Canada. So there is a bit of a forced marriage there.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you look at the license plate in Quebec, it says "Je me souviens," which means, it's in French, it means I remember. And that's basically a reminder to French Canadians that we really don't belong in Canada. Mm-hmm. That I remember that I am French, I am Quebecois. I don't belong to this larger country. And that's on the license plates of every single car in Quebec.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I'm born of those two parents. My father passed away about 5 years ago. He had lung cancer from cigarette smoking, which is why I never ever tried cigarettes in my life.
Great.
Tried other things, many other things though, but not cigarette smoking. And my mother's still around. She's a perfect, lovely mother, and I visit her often in Canada.
And what year were you born?
I was born in 1972, so I'll be. I'm 49 now. I'm gonna be the big 50 in a couple of weeks.
Oh, a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
What are we doing to celebrate?
I don't know. I'll be with your ex-girlfriend.
Can I tag along?
Sure.
Don't leave, guys. I can get used to this. So let's back up. So 72. Yeah, you were born just a couple of years before me. I'm born in 75.
That's another vintage year.
Yeah. Great. We won't say what year Nastasia was born in.
That's a vintage year too.
So you're born in 72,
mm-hmm.
and did your father raise you to have some connection to your Palestinian roots?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So my father had a lot of trauma from that, and there was a point in his life. Just being Palestinian continues to be a traumatic experience to this day. Mm-hmm. There's been no solution. In fact, it's gotten harder. It's just a life of misery and hell for Palestinians to this day. So he was really confused as to whether he should raise me to connect me to that culture because there's just so much trauma, or to whitewash me. What should he do? And he went back and forth throughout the years of my life. Whitewash Palestine, whitewash Palestine, whitewash Palestine.
Really?
Yeah.
Could you feel this
ping-ponging?
ping-ponging?
Yeah, I felt this ping-ponging.
How did it manifest?
Like, for example,
Give me an example of whitewashing and an example of reconnecting.
yeah. So an example of whitewashing would be that he would not go too deep in teaching me Arabic too well. And so he insisted in most of the time speaking in English.
How was his English?
His English was great. He did speak like it was funny. He spoke like Hollywood English because
right, the Bogart style.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was concerned about if I knew Arabic too well, that I would go deep into that culture and have more Arabic friends, and then I just start spiraling over the issues that are happening in Palestine. And then and
he was worried that would be a distraction for your potential success, let's say.
Yeah, my father had a fanatic focus on my success because we grew up in poverty. He grew up in poverty. And he really wanted me to be the one to break that pattern.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was really into my academic and financial success.
And you have siblings?
I have siblings. I have a brother called Kareem.
Yeah. Older or younger?
He's younger.
So you're the first?
I'm the first.
So he pointed at you with a lot of weight and responsibility.
Yeah, and in Arabic culture, the firstborn son tends to be there's a bit of an overweight on that. In fact, in Arabic culture and Palestinian culture, when your son is born, you lose your name. You become, so for example, if you had a child and he was Hassan, let's say you call him, give me a name.
Whatever.
Okay,
Samir.
Sam. Say, so you would be like in Arabic, it's my father's name is Munir, but when I was born, he lost his name. He became Abu Samir, which means the father of Samir.
Amazing.
You lose your name. Your name is gone.
Your first name becomes
your name becomes your son's name, and you become father of Samir.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, you lose your name.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting kind of concretization of this ideal of like pointing your energies towards the
firstborn,
the success of your firstborn son.
Yeah.
So obviously the pressure was
every
helpful and successful because you've done well for yourself.
It wasn't a straight line.
Let's
There's been some failures around.
I want to hear the journey, step by step. Wait, so we got the example of the whitewashing. Give me example then of how he then would try to reinforce your Palestinian.
Well, we'd
heritage.
go back to Israel sometimes, and we'd go to Nazareth and we'd go to the West Bank, and he would show me instead of saying anything. He would just show.
Interesting.
And there was your eyes. You can't There are no lies when the eyes are looking at the.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been, but I have so many friends who have gone. Even with I grew up here in Beverly Hills, and it's with 90% Jewish friends, and I grew up going to bar mitzvahs and a Jewish stepfather.
Right.
My grandfather Billy Berger had to escape from Austria when he was 3 years old with his family for just having a Jewish last name.
Right.
And but the people who I've gravitated towards, who are genuinely progressive and can have compassion for situations that are obviously unjust, have gone. I know many. I have many friends who have gone to Israel, even wanting to think that there are. That there's the kind of a both sidesism at first, but once you witness it,
it's not both sides.
It's a little harder to see, to justify. I mean, and then I have friends who do kind of still very much, kind of try and support. But I feel like the American viewpoint is so propagandized. And so romanticized and so willfully ignorant of what's going on, actually, that it's interesting. Like as an Italian, it's interesting the way you see like Italian Americans, the way you romanticize the old country, right?
Right.
There is a sense that like there's more progressive resistance amongst like Jews in Israel, it seems, than there is in the United States.
That's
where
true.
There's this kind of romanticization of what's happening there.
That's right.
And an idealization almost. So tell me how old were you when you went back the first time?
Well, my father brought me, I was around 13 years old. And we went, my brother and I went, and Yasser Arafat was alive at that time, and there was a lot of talks between Palestine.
Yeah, there was hope.
There was a lot of hope, actually.
This is in the early 90s.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so there was a degree of, you know what, things are going to change. We're going to actually have a country. We're going to have Palestine. And my father was hopeful, and he wanted to show me. But also we saw the injustice. We saw the settlers and the occupied territories and how they occupied the hilltops and how they would just use sewers and how the shit would just literally drop into Palestinian villages. It wasn't just injustice. It was cruel. There was a sense of, it's hard to explain. It was almost intentionally, not almost, there were some things I saw that were intentionally cruel.
Yeah.
And I never understood that. And for me, it's not about being Palestinian.
I think it does seem to be, I have talked to people who are honest about this, saying that the only way to solve this problem from the Jewish side is just to make life as intolerable as possible for Palestinians in the hope that they'll just all leave.
But but Palestinians can't leave. They don't have a passport.
I know.
This doesn't make any sense. Where do those people in the Gaza Strip can go? It's just a large, giant, open-air museum.
Prison. Yeah, or prison.
Sorry, not museum. Sorry, prison.
Yeah.
If Palestinians could leave, I'm sure they would, but they can't. And so I don't understand the intention to make these lives more miserable than they need to be. And this is not about being Palestinian. Even if it was any other nation or people or like even an alien race, like no need to cause misery when you don't have to. And so it's just heartbreaking. I don't understand it. I've studied the issue, and I've gone to the actual places, and I've had these debates with so many people, and I feel like I'm missing something because I just can't understand the desire to hurt for no reason another.
What do you have any theories?
I do. I think that the military-industrial complex has a lot to do with it. Mm-hmm. I think that there is a lot of profit that takes place within the capitalist system of selling guns, bullets, missiles, and so on. I think that...
and the fact that Israelis have to do 2 years of military
That's right. Look, the military, the entire military industry is an industry that's very expensive, that's supported by taxpayers. That tax-paying money goes into buying instruments and weaponry from defense companies. These defense companies have lobby groups. These lobby groups support the politicians, fund the politicians that will vote for pro-military funding. And so we have this vicious circle, and this is what's happening in the United States. In fact, I think, I forgot the name of the president that warned us about that in his exit interview.
Eisenhower, I think.
Eisenhower literally said, beware of the military-industrial complex. Yeah. They're wielding a lot of power that's creating very perverse incentives. Yeah. He said that in his exit interview. Yeah. I just don't understand why this interview is not made more famous than it is.
So, but this is the American issue. Do you think that spills over into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by...
I think there is no, I don't think that's the only reason. Mm-hmm. I think from an American point of view, it's one of the things that's happening. Mm-hmm. All the military contribution to Israel, there are people who are profiting from that. But I think there is also some strange messianic idea that this land can't be shared, and that God was some sort of giant real estate agent that promised some people a certain land. It's just, all this human conflict is wrapped up into who has the most, powerful imaginary friend.
Right. So did this turn you off of religion and onto philosophy early on, would you say?
It certainly made me question mainstream thinking, especially when I saw the gap between what's happening in the news and what's happening actually on the ground. And I started noticing patterns very quickly. And my naivety was gone after I was 13 when I did that trip.
How long did you spend there?
Just for a couple of months with my dad. Yeah. But it was enough for me to realize that I'm being fed a lot of bullshit.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And so then did you go, you finished high school in Canada and went to Oxford?
Yep. I finished high school.
What brought you to Oxford?
Um,
Besides it being the best university in the world.
well, I think I met some people who are a bit stupid there too. So I think it's the reason why I did okay in academics is actually an unusual reason. I actually, when I started high school, I had some major behavioral issues, and those issues brought me into a situation where the school had to have me leave, and I went to this like semi-juvenile school for a year.
So you were rebellious.
I was very rebellious, and in that juvenile school that I was sent to, it was really rough dudes. It was just these rough, very rough people. And I was not one of them. And, and they were very like violent. And so I found myself never, like during breaks, I never went out the schoolyard, and I stayed in the library constantly. I was just in the library all the time for physical safety reasons.
Wow.
And while I was in the library, I just started picking up the books and reading them and just doing my homework really well.
Yeah.
I had all this extra time. It was a boarding school.
We were lucky that we didn't have phones back then.
We did not have phones back then.
Yeah.
You and I are the last generation to ever know in the history of humanity, to ever know what life was like before the internet happened, before those phones happened.
Yeah.
You and I are the last ones.
It's true. It's true. I mean, I think that I don't think you can overstate how much being bored and only having a book there, and not having Instagram and all these things. I mean, we sound like old farts, but like it is like a huge difference, especially for someone who like, you know, might have a restless mind, as we probably both had.
Both of us, yes.
If all there is a book, you're going to pick up the book.
You're going to read the book.
Yeah.
So I read the book. I just started loving knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's how I became a really good student. And after that 1 year, that particular special school, they said, okay, he's really rehabilitated. He's totally fine. I went back to the school that I was kicked out of, and I just became a star student because I just love being a student.
Great.
And that's how it all unfolded.
And so then did you go to Oxford knowing you wanted to study philosophy and law?
Yes. Law was important to me because I didn't want to be a doctor. The sight of blood sort of made me like, yeah. So it was one of those classic things. You're going to be a lawyer or a doctor. And
this is by virtue of your father's pressure?
Yes.
That those are the two options?
Yeah, exactly.
What did he do in the meantime? When he came from Palestine and settled in Canada, what career did he... He
was a car mechanic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And wanted you to be a doctor or a lawyer.
He just wanted me to be successful, and it was time for him. It was like just be a doctor or a lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah, he continued to be an illiterate car mechanic.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I.
And your mother, did she work?
Yeah, she was a tarot card reader.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
And so I went to that university, and then after I graduated, I went to Columbia Law School. Mm-hmm. I got my law degree there. And
by this time, were you attracted to the law, besides your queasiness at the sight of blood, which I also share with you, by the way? Were you attracted to the law as either a social or philosophical domain, let's say?
I liked the wordplay involved in law. I loved the turns of phrases and how that could have such an powerful impact.
Yeah.
And I love the jousting
that
occurs between two humans when they're trying to refine or sharpen an idea. I love the Socratic method of being questioned.
Dialectic.
And that's right. And that's one of the things I really loved about Oxford. There are no classrooms there.
I know.
It's one-on-one. People don't understand there's no such thing as a classroom at Oxford. You go see your professor twice a week, and what he or she does is just tries to really grind you to see if you actually read the work.
Right.
And, there's a reading list. You go through the reading list and you meet with your professor, and he'll just start debating. He'll start questioning you. And if he or she thinks you have a particular point of view, he's going to ask you right there and then, I want you to argue the opposite point of view.
Really?
So you have to, it's just a constant like how to argue but be neutral to whatever point of view it was that you had.
Oh, wonderful.
And that was a really interesting muscle to train over 4 years at Oxford.
And then, so you went to Columbia. Did you have were you compelled to study a particular area of law were you attracted to?
At the time, I was a little shocked by going to an American law school because it was the first time I was in a classroom, and there was like 300 people in the classroom. And I was like, I felt like it felt like an assembly line.
Right.
It didn't feel special, and so I did that, and I had to be practical at the time because I was amassing some fairly large student debts, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because my parents couldn't pay for any of it. So I had these loans, and I was starting to get really stressed out. And so I had to be practical. I studied corporate law, and I joined Skadden Arps, which is like the meanest, most blue chip law firm in the U.S.
Meanest by you mean just most aggressive?
Very aggressive. Very aggressive, very hard to get into. It was one of the hardest law firms to get into. And so I was really happy I got into that law firm. It was very strange because I was 29 years old and I got this offer to work there, and they're like, "Here, this is going to be your secretary. This is going to be your office." And I'm like, I'm 29 fucking years old. And it was very strange. But I remember before I started that job at Skadden, I had a few months in between my graduation and the law firm. And I decided to be homeless in New York City for a month.
Really?
Yeah, I told my dad, listen, I'm going to just work. I want to live in the streets. Just want to see what it's like. Cause
like literally sleeping on the sidewalk?
Sleeping in the sidewalk, sleeping in the subway. So I did that. I committed to 30 days. I lasted 24. And it was a really interesting experience.
But wait, did you have like an ATM card and money to eat?
I left my wallet, everything behind.
You just wanted to see what it's like to be a homeless person?
I wanted to see what it was like because I knew I would never have that situation ever again.
Wow.
And so
so you knew you had the job offer.
I knew I had the job offer. I was starting in September, and I just wanted to see what that was like. Great. And I remember, it was such an interesting experience.
So you left your wallet. So you had just the clothes on your back?
Just the clothes on my back. I remember the first time.
What month of the year was this?
It was August.
Okay, so it's warm.
It was very warm, and I remember the first time I asked, like, I remember, okay, it was day 2, and I was getting really hungry, and I was like, okay, this is when I need to ask for money. Uh-huh. And I remember I was in the subway. I was on the N train from Astoria to Manhattan, and I remember, okay, I have to do this now. I have to ask for money because I'm hungry. I need money.
Yeah.
To get a sandwich.
Yeah.
And I remember asking this guy for money. He had a suit on. He was probably a fucking lawyer.
Yeah. He has no idea that you have a law degree and you're about to start working at this law firm.
Yeah, exactly. And so I asked, and he completely ignored me. And I got to tell you how it was. I still remember how devastated. I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. I was ready to call it quits after that because he just ignored me, and like I was like some disgusting thing.
Yeah. Wow, this is such an important thing to have done, though. My God.
Oh yeah. I'm so glad I did it, but I'm not proud that I didn't finish the 30 days, but I did
24 is still better than 2. If you told me you gave up after that moment.
No. But eventually
what did you just have to ask a bunch of people until someone gave you some money?
It was just like one of those things, like math. Just keep asking, and eventually you'll get the money. And I remember my first meal was a Subway sandwich, a meatball Subway sandwich. I remember I was like, God, this is the first time I'm eating from begging.
Yeah.
And then I learned a couple of weeks later that my best hit rate was in Penn Station, like to get money, because there are all these Americans who are coming to New York who are a little bit more like if you ask money from New Yorkers, because New Yorkers are very hardened.
They're inured to that, like suffering and seeing on the road. You have to be in a way.
You have to be, because otherwise you just can't live in New York.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who don't live in New York are coming out of Penn Station, and I noticed that when you ask money from these non-New Yorkers, more often than not, I get some change. Anyway, so that was really an experience.
And were you ever tempted to get into a conversation with someone that would like reveal your actual situation?
No, but there are some street street guys. It was interesting. They have turfs, and like there are times where when I was asking for money, these street guys would get very aggressive. They're like, this is my spot. This is where I ask for. You can't be here. So, believe it or not, street people have
no,
turfs.
I believe it. Yeah. And where were you sleeping?
I slept on subway stations, like in the train, because they're 24 hours. And
so you could just be riding the train and
Yeah.
So you'd use some of your money that you got from begging to get a train ticket, or you jump the.
I jumped.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Wow. And so the 24th day, you were just like, "That's it. I can't do this anymore."
Yeah. I mean, it was a combination of like hygiene. I was really smelling really bad, and I did try to go to the bathroom to wash my armpits and stuff like that, but like my clothes were like it was getting really disgusting. I was getting really itchy from.
Wow.
Yeah. So
showering in the heat was
it was really gross. And so just the itch was too much for me. I know that sounds silly.
So so you had an apartment. You could.
Yeah. I went back to Astoria where my brother was living, and I was sharing an apartment with him at the time, and
did he think this idea was crazy?
Oh, my dad and my brother my dad was so upset. It was so
really?
I was white hot angry with me. He's like,
really?
Yeah, he thought I lost my marbles, because his whole raison d'etre was to make sure his firstborn son would be successful. And what I do, I'd fucking end up intentionally being a bum for almost a month. But I just wanted to see what that was like. I just wanted to really understand that fully before
entering literally the dark side. And I want to hear this.
What do you mean?
I want to hear like going from this into like this corporate law office. What was that like?
It was so jarring. My first case was I don't even know if I'm allowed to say it, but fuck it. Larry Silverstein, who is the landlord of the World Trade Center, he wanted to get his insurance policy affected twice, because we had to make the argument. We made the argument to the insurance policy that those were two separate events. And so you owe
each plane
was two separate events. So you owe the insurance payout twice. The insurance policy, the insurancer, where it's like, that's one event.
Right.
You can't be paid twice.
Right.
And we were making the argument that no, that's two separate events. So you could imagine I went from.
But wait, did they have offices in both buildings, you mean?
Larry Silverstein owned both buildings.
I see.
And he was claiming on the insurance policies after 9/11 happened that those were two separate events. He should be paid twice.
Interesting.
And that was my first case. Can you imagine the greed?
I can't.
that was my first case after, living as a bum in New York. So that was mentally, that was almost traumatic, because I went from like begging for money for a Subway sandwich to being a soldier for this greedy landlord who is trying to claim twice on the back of 3,000 people who just died.
Yeah.
So that was my first, that was my foray into,
corporate America.
Yeah.
But you stuck with it.
I did, because
how long?
I had student loans.
Yeah.
That's the problem when you have student loans. You don't think straight.
Well, I think it's not. It's by design. I remember talking to a friend who was a judge, and he said, we don't need in America. We don't need like openly autocratic methods to keep people in line, and we do it in much more subtle ways.
That's right.
And one of them is debt. Because if you have people who are always one paycheck away from losing everything, then they're not gonna strike. They're not gonna like walk out of their jobs. Like in Europe, even like where there's much less like mortgages, people like own their houses for generations. You have, countrywide
strikes,
general strikes.
That's right.
They don't exist here.
Nope.
Because people are afraid of losing what they have, which they think they have, but they don't really have.
So you have this, it's debt. You're not, medical is not free.
Yeah.
So you're living paycheck to paycheck. It creates this existential angst
and compliance.
That's right. Yeah. Where people, like you said, they can't there's a right to General Assembly, but you can't really practice that right. Because you don't want to lose your next paycheck.
Yeah.
So people are living desperately. I was living desperately. I was, my first, I was 29. I was making $140,000 a year. Which is a lot of money for a 29-year-old living in New York. After taxes and paying my student loans, I was living paycheck to paycheck. It was really interesting. And so I forgot what the question was.
No, just how long did you stick with the law for?
Oh, right.
And what happened next?
Yeah. So I slept under a desk for 4 years. I was working for a guy called Roger Aaron, and Roger Aaron was one of the main characters in this book called Barbarians at the Gate. Do you recall that book from
No.
the 80s? It was his specialty was hostile takeovers, and so I was working for him, and I learned how to. he fired me every week. It was really funny.
Why?
Yeah, just that was his style. I had to ignore it. I was told just to ignore it.
Oh, you mean he would just yell at you that you're fired, but you weren't really?
Yeah, and so that was hard. So I just learned how to like take it. It was really interesting. And so I after 4 years of that, one of my clients was a Japanese hedge fund, and I got very close with them, and they asked me to join them in Japan. I've never been to Japan, and I just said yes, and I just moved from New York to Tokyo. Never been to Tokyo before. Ended up living there I lived in Asia for about 9 years.
Oh, wow.
And that's how my whole career in Asia started. I joined this Japanese hedge fund, and I was responsible for raising their money. And that's when I stopped being a lawyer, and I ended up being more into the capital markets, where I was raising capital for this particular weird exotic Japanese hedge fund.
And you started making some decent money here.
Yeah, I did really well. I think, if there's any message I could give to lawyers, is just get out of that profession. It's not worth it if you do the math, how many hours you work.
Right.
Just do the division of how much money you make and the hours you work. It's really not worth it.
Interesting.
So I worked for this Japanese hedge fund, and the founder and the CEO was really he really liked me, and he became my mentor, and I ended up working for that organization, and I was, after 9 years working there, I was head of marketing, and I was responsible for raising all their money, which ended up being in the billions.
Amazing. And so what years was this?
This was around from 2003 to 2011, and then Bank of America Merrill Lynch poached me from this organization and asked me to head their capital strategy for all of Asia Pacific, and I did that for a number of years. I was head of capital strategy there for that bank. That was really a lot of fun. And then I went to I was 40 years old at that time, and I went to Burning Man. And I met a girl at Burning Man, and it was the first time I experienced, different mind altering things. And I met a girl there, and she was living in London at the time, and I was living in Hong Kong, and we had a relationship, and we decided to live in New York. I didn't want to live in London. She didn't want to live in Hong Kong, and we came to New York.
I remember in 2010-ish, speaking of Burning Man and mind-altering things, I have this group of friends who I affectionately call the Harvard Ravers, because they're just like all these cool Ivy League educated scientists and educators, but they also like to go to Burning Man and take weird drugs. And I was on a little email list called Geeks, and one of them wrote saying, I've just read this white paper about this idea called Bitcoin, and I've read it like 5-6 times, and I can't find any holes in it. I think this thing has legs, right?
Yeah.
And I think Bitcoin at the time was probably like 3 cents or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I still kick myself for not having.
Everybody, a lot of people do.
Yeah. But then a couple of years later, I got very interested in mind-altering substances, particularly DMT. And DMT, now it's more kind of talked about, and you find it in vape pens and stuff, but it was like really, really, no one knew where to get it.
Yeah.
So then at the time, there was something I heard about called the Silk Road.
Oh, yeah.
Which you could buy these substances.
I heard about that.
On the internet. And so I started ordering DMT on the Silk Road, which was really interesting, because people would get rated. It was as if you were like on eBay or Amazon or something, but then people would get rated according to like their level of stealth in sending you things. And so like this guy was selling from the Popcorn Junction in Austin, Texas, and you'd get this bag of popcorn, and inside was the Mexican spice. I think the statute of limitations is over, hopefully, for admitting to like doing this.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's a long
we're
time
just
ago.
actors. We're rehearsing for a role here.
Exactly. This is method acting.
Yeah. Anyway, so I found this really interesting, and I was like talking to my friends and saying, look, this is really cool, because at the time also it was really hard to send money to people. And so I remember my best friend lived in China, and I was like, look, I can send you a penny for instantly, and it costs nothing. And so I would set up all my friends with Bitcoin wallets. And then I went to Italy, and my older brother is much more conservative than I am. And I was like singing the praise of this. He's like, no, this is terrible. This is like the criminal thing. And I was like, I'm going to give you a Bitcoin for Christmas. And he's like, I don't want it. And
you must regret it.
this was like, at the time, it was like a couple $100 for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, I was really pleased with myself. And when it went up to $1,000, I sold most of them, because I thought like, I'm really clever. I made $10,000 or something.
I mean, that's the right decision to make. You really no one knew.
That nobody knew.
Yeah.
But I became very interested in it, not just from many angles, as a kind of alternative monetary system that was cool to like. I'm very interested in like we talked about having a rebellious streak. I like things that kind of thumb their nose at
Likewise.
establishment.
Yeah.
And this felt like that. It mixed kind of like this ethos from Burning Man, which I think at the time was still really felt like a kind of, I think today it's changed a bit, but I think there was a real sense that this was a, if not an alternative society, at least practice for living a different way.
Yeah.
And so this kind of mixture of like mixing technology with an anarchic approach to exchange, really fascinated me. And so I'm just curious now if we could just talk about how you came into this world and what's become of it, because it's an interesting trajectory. I imagine it's an interesting story, which I'd love to hear your take on.
Well, I share your fascination about alternative systems and alternative ways of thinking and alternative money. I started, as I mentioned, I started as a lawyer, and then I became a banker. I was basically, a warrior for the financial services industry for many years. And for about 16 years, I was doing that as a lawyer, and then I was head of capital strategy for Parental and so on. And I noticed very clearly that the system is rigged, and I was a part of that. The people in banks and in law firms, they're on the wrong side of the fight. And so, when Bitcoin was invented, it did get my attention because it was an alternative system that did not need lawyers or bankers, and it's basically like a threat to my careers, because I spent all this time in school and in this career, and Bitcoin was basically our kryptonite, because if people believed in that, we lawyers and bankers were no longer needed. So instead of going against it, I decided to embrace it. And so it was basically
What year did you first hear about it?
Well, I first heard about it during those Silk Road times, but where I got professionally involved in Bitcoin, or at least in crypto, was about in 2016.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Relatively recently.
Yeah, I mean, 2016.
I guess that's a long time ago in this
crypto.
world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I co-founded a company called Fluidity. We did something called AirSwap, and we were one of the first ones to invent something called a decentralized exchange, where you could exchange value without a middleman, and we did that on the Ethereum ecosystem. And now I'm helping run a large publicly listed Bitcoin company. It's listed under Nasdaq, and the reason why I got involved in that is because there was this argument about how Bitcoin is hurting the environment. And I thought this was a good chance to to show how Bitcoin mining can be done in a way that's sustainable by using sun, solar, hydro, and wind. If we could use the power of nature and to generate money.
Wait, can you back up a little? Can you explain how Bitcoin mining works and why it's necessary?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people have a kind of vague idea about it. They hear about it as being very wasteful. A friend of mine who's seems to often come up in these podcasts because he's like in the background kind of provoking me. He's a professor, and he said, ask Samir, please, what does he think about the fact that like Bitcoin mining uses more power than the only thing that uses more power is the U.S. military, maybe.
That's not true. That's really not true. Did you know that domestic tumble dryers actually use more power than Bitcoin?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Video game playing in California takes more power than Bitcoin.
Okay, let's back up. First off,
So
I want you to explain for the lay audience, what the fuck is Bitcoin mining? Why is it necessary? Just a little kind of explain it like I'm five type situation.
Yeah, and at a very high level, Bitcoin mining, I don't know why they use the word mining really. It's just, these are just computers. So taking a step back, this mysterious guy called Satoshi, in 2008, when the crisis happened, when the banks fell apart, this mysterious person that no one has ever been able to identify to this day created a system called Bitcoin, where it's basically a stored value where you could exchange with each other without any middleman. And you have to understand, the middleman industry are bankers and lawyers. When you and I exchange money on Venmo, or you do a wire or whatever, there's going to be a bunch of bankers and lawyers in the background, and they're taking a little piece of that transaction that you make. Billions of these transactions happen every day. So you have this very wasteful industry between you and I when you and I exchange value. Bitcoin does not need lawyers and bankers. And if enough people believe in it, it becomes a monster where you could just exchange value now without all that industry in between you and I. So that's why there's a lot of people who are against.
Not to mention, you said lawyers and bankers. You left out like the military and the government.
Well,
obviously backing the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
Right?
So the U.S. dollar is backed by state violence.
Yeah.
If you do not believe in the U.S. dollar, you're going to be taken down by the military. That's the dollar is backed by state violence.
Yeah.
That's true. Bitcoin is not backed by state violence. So it's a threat to that as well. It's a threat to so many different types of industries. And I find that so fascinating because the technology is perfectly sound. And what Bitcoin mining is it's really simple. The way Satoshi did it was that in order to earn a Bitcoin, you need to solve very complicated mathematical equations. And only these computers can do that. So if you have a computer, you plug it in, there's a little program, and it's basically solving these math problems. And whichever computer solves the math problem first gets the Bitcoin. So that's how it works. And so if you have a lot of different computers, just like if you bought a bunch of lottery tickets, the chances of you solving that Bitcoin or solving that math problem, just like a lottery ticket, the chance of winning that lottery ticket if you buy a bunch is greater. So in our company, we have like tens and tens of thousands of computers solving these math problems, and we generate Bitcoin that way. It's that simple. And there's a bit of a dirty secret with these math problems. They're actually not math problems. They're just guessing numbers.
Right.
They're literally just guessing a number.
Wow.
A long number. And the computer has to guess the numbers constantly, and eventually, by wild coincidence, it'll guess the right number. These numbers can be really long.
Right.
And so if it guesses the number, it gets the Bitcoin, but you have to do this constantly. So that's what Bitcoin mining is. It's a very simple, it's almost dumb.
Right.
But the reason why it's powerful is because, as I said earlier, it's the world's first global currency that's not backed by a sovereign. It's the people's currency. So in the past,
now the fact that the Chinese like have decided to crack down on it points to the fact that you're probably right, that like it challenges kind of authoritarian values. That said, the United States is one of the most aggressive empires that has ever been the earth has ever known. Why, if it's as like subversive as you say, why are the Americans embracing it?
Well, I'm not sure if the Americans are embracing it. We've had some actions by people like Elizabeth Warren, who's going after Bitcoin. She's under the impression that Bitcoin is something that's of a threat, and she's right in a way. It is a threat. It is a threat to states because Bitcoin doesn't care about states. Bitcoin doesn't care about banks, lawyers, and so on. There is a movement in the U.S., a pretty active one, to ban Bitcoin. But the problem with banning Bitcoin, it's a decentralized thing. It's like saying we're going to ban the internet. You can't ban the internet.
Right.
It just as China tried to ban Bitcoin last year. What happened? Didn't do anything. You can't ban something that's decentralized. And so, there is an unfortunate fact with Congress, with politicians, particularly in the United States. They're old. They're so old. The president is very old. These senators are very old. They're in their 70s and 80s. They don't belong there. They're using institutional apparatus to stay in power. And that's against the laws of nature. If you look at throughout the universe, like since the beginning of time, when life happened, when an organism turns old, the younger organism takes over.
Right.
That's just the laws of nature. If you look at monkeys and lions and all the animals, that's what happens. But with humans, they use these fictions called Congress or banks or whatever to hold on artificially to power. And that's why you have these very old people who are in these seats of power who won't let go because of these fictions that we have. And that's going against the laws of nature. And that's why we have a fucked up society. That's one of the reasons why. These old people do not reflect where we need to be. And so you have these very old politicians who are deciding for us, about Bitcoin or the internet or abortion or what have you.
But it seems like, unfortunately, it seems like all these ideals that start out so decentralized, they always tend towards greater and greater centralization. Like the internet was talked about in the 90s,
Right.
Like people like Timothy Leary and stuff were talking about this, going to democratize everything. And all of a sudden power goes back to the people.
Yeah.
And then slowly, like it creeps back towards now there's a few conglomerates that are bigger. The biggest companies that the earth has ever known.
That's true.
And tech companies.
That's true.
Wealth is amassing to the few. The same thing happened with Bitcoin. I mean, we used to when I told you these friends of mine were into Bitcoin, everyone was mining them on their laptops and making their own and like buying a pizza with 10,000 Bitcoins that you made like the night before.
You're right.
And now it's like centralizing again, right?
Yeah.
So I would love to hear you react to because it's like we mentioned Burning Man, same thing. Burning Man has become big. It's become centralized more. It's expensive to go.
Burning Man used to be a place where you would dissolve your ego, right?
Right.
And now it's a place where now people build their ego.
Yeah.
It's become the opposite. You go there, you concern which camp are you at, what are you wearing, who are you hanging out with. It's become an ego building exercise. But there was a time when you would go just to delete your ego for just a week because you're forced to be off your phone. There's no connection. Yeah. You're forced to talk to people that you would not normally speak to, right? Like I met lumberjacks at Burning Man. I would never meet lumberjacks in New York City. Yeah. Like there was all these conversations took place, but now it's the opposite. Now one does care. I care about where I'm placed. I care about my experience. Yeah. That's what Burning Man has become to this today. If you want to have a great experience, you have to make sure that you're well placed, that you're with a crew, that this, that, and the other, that you can. But that wasn't Burning Man then.
So now the same with crypto. Like it seemed like it was this amazing, like democratic thing with no central power. Now you have a few people who seem very arbitrarily to have made a lot of money from it. It seems to be amassing wealth amongst the few lucky people. The miners are now all, I can't mine on my laptop.
No,
you need to
have
a big company.
No, you're right.
And so do you think, is there anything left of the ideal
I don't think there are perfect solutions. I do know that here's what I know. If you think about the history of money, in the beginning, money was taken from the ground. It was taken from gold and silver. We had to pull it from the ground. Okay. That was money. Right. And then money came from the government. The government said these pieces of paper are worth X amount, right? So it was no longer about money taken from the ground. It was money that was dictated by the state.
Yeah.
And now we have money that has come from this mysterious source. It's now from the people. Now it's just a belief that we have together that this Bitcoin's worth this much. I agree with you about, I'm very much against centralization. I think freedom lies in decentralization.
Yeah.
That to me is my most guiding force. My most guiding force is freedom, right? And then I believe decentralization is the best way to get there. So I do think the flaws that you're pointing out about Bitcoin and crypto are valid and real, but it's a much more better world than the one we have now with the US dollar that's backed by state violence and all these bankers and lawyers making obscene amounts of money, literally not adding value. You know, bankers and lawyers add zero value.
Yeah. Not to mention hedge fund.
Zero value.
Yeah.
Hedge funds, zero value. They do not help build anything. Lawyers build nothing. Bankers build nothing. They do not add value. They simply take a little bit. Every time you move money from point A to point B, they'll steal a tiny little bit and they'll call it a transaction fee.
Yeah. And so what do you say? I would love for you to defend the industry against people who say it's environmentally catastrophic and it's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, what isn't a Ponzi scheme?
I mean,
you know what I mean?
Barter isn't a Ponzi scheme, or like.
Well, bartering is not a Ponzi scheme, but Bitcoin's not a Ponzi scheme. It's very clear. It depends on everything is supply and demand. If there's a demand for it, then it's going to be worth something. So today, Bitcoin's worth about $30,000. There's a reason why. It's because you have millions of people who are ready to buy that at a certain amount. Gold today is worth a certain amount. Why? Because it's purely belief. Is gold a Ponzi scheme? I don't think so. It's just a belief. It's a stored value that's worth this much.
Right.
Gold itself is not actually really rare. We don't have to mine any more gold. By the way, gold is a much more environmentally destructive process than Bitcoin
just
mining.
Mining gold.
Mining gold, you're raising mountaintops, going into the earth, actually mining. You're damaging the earth.
Right.
That's a much larger carbon footprint than these computers solving math problems. And Bitcoin can actually replace gold. We don't need to have gold. Gold is normally used as a way to hedge inflation. Right. But Bitcoin's digital gold. We don't have to have gold anymore. We could move that to Bitcoin, which is a much more environmentally friendly proxy to inflation hedging than gold is. So that's one argument. Another argument is it's just not true that Bitcoin takes that much energy. People have looked at the studies and actually looked at how much energy Bitcoin mining takes, and it's like 0.016% of the world's energy. That's really small. That makes no difference. So there was this study that came out. I forgot where it came out, but it created all this, what people call FUD. FUD is fear, uncertainty, doubt. And it just created all this FUD about Bitcoin mining, and it was almost a cancer to intellectual thinking, where people thought Bitcoin takes all this energy. It's really not true.
It's just not true.
It's just not true.
And what are you doing to use renewables to?
Yeah.
I watched this amazing piece that Vice did about you, using power in Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about?
Yeah. So when I entered the industry didn't really think about how to mine Bitcoin in an environmentally friendly way. There was a bit of chatter about it, but no one was taking it seriously. So we wanted to, take it seriously and to really lean in hard on mining Bitcoin in a sustainable manner to address those concerns that Bitcoin mining was hurting the environment. So what we did was we started using clean sources of power. So we became carbon free, which is very different from carbon neutral. And I'd love to explain the difference.
Yeah, please do.
Carbon neutral is basically, you use power in a fossil fuel sort of way, and then you buy a certificate that neutralizes the damage you did. That's like taking a shit in a room and then using an air freshener. Right. That's not what we do. We actually don't take the shit in the room in the first place, and we just use a clean sources of power. We're not buying a certificate to try to neutralize the damage we did. Right. So, there are a lot of people who go around saying, yeah, we're carbon neutral. That's actually bad.
Right.
So we're carbon free.
Okay.
And so at least the majority.
Yeah.
And what we've done is we've partnered up with people who have taken operations that, for example, we have an operation, the Niagara Falls, and in that particular operation, it used to be a fossil fuel situation where we took that operation and we converted into a Bitcoin mining center that now draws power from the Niagara River. And we think that's a great thing. That was because of Bitcoin. We decommissioned a dirty situation into a clean one.
Wait, so this is not power that otherwise would go to like warming people's homes?
Not at all.
How is that?
Because it was basically a factory that was being used to create tires for a car company.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that they were using coal for that,
Mm-hmm.
which was weird because it was right next to the Niagara Falls where you could just use hydro.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we decommissioned that, and that plant now draws power from Niagara Falls, and it generates Bitcoin. And we create.
So you guys are generating your own power?
Well, no, this factory is plugged into a grid that draws power from the Niagara River.
I see.
And so we did that, and we created all these tax revenues for all these schools that really need it. You know, if you think about upstate New York, particularly in the Buffalo region, that used to be the center of gravity for manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And after NAFTA was done, NAFTA is the free trade agreement, where it was really unfortunate for the manufacturing industry because all the manufacturing industry went to China.
Right.
And so when China banned Bitcoin, it was really poetic because we took all those machines that we had in China, and we put them in upstate New York, in Buffalo, exactly where that region used to be the center of gravity that China took.
Right.
So China banned an industry, and we brought that back into the Buffalo region.
That's
so we
amazing.
thought that
That's
was
beautiful.
a nice poetic.
Yeah, I like that. Amazing. And so where do you see for the future, in an ideal world, like where is crypto 10 years from now? Is it always going to be Bitcoin? Are you worried or excited about alternatives that don't require mining or, proof of stake instead of...
Well, just taking a step back, I'm very excited by the newer generation, like Gen Z. They're much more at ease with crypto than the boomers. And the boomers right now are still controlling the levers of power. Mm-hmm. But eventually those guys are going to die. Mm-hmm. And the newer generation are going to take over. And these newer generations are much more comfortable and have normalized crypto and Bitcoin and what have you more than these baby boomers have done. So the future is bright because once this new generation takes over these levers of power, they're going to be less allergic and less hysterically fearful of crypto because they were born and raised with it.
But do you see people actually adopting it as a way as a currency? Because I was more excited about that in the Silk Road days. Now it seems like it's gotten much more expensive and slow to send money, and Venmo now didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
Now it's much easier to send you $1 on Venmo than it is, like we're buying Burning Man tickets. We're not talking about, we're supporters of crypto, but we're not paying each other in crypto. Why is that? And is that going to change?
There are some countries who have adopted Bitcoin as currency, like El Salvador, mm-hmm. which is the first country to do so. We actually visited El Salvador after they made their announcement. It was a really interesting process. Personally, I have an unpopular opinion about this. I don't think Bitcoin's a currency. I think it's more of it's a gold. It's more of a gold situation. Like if you want to have some gold bars and you're safe, don't buy gold, buy Bitcoin instead. Yeah. It's not a thing to just use Bitcoin to buy bubble gum. You use it as a way to organize your portfolio, mm-hmm. And to have that as a backup. Bitcoin's the only thing in the entire world that the government can't take from you. Did you know that?
I didn't know this.
The government could take your money.
Yeah.
They could take your property. They could take the clothes off your back, but they can't take your Bitcoin because Bitcoin does not need bank accounts or governments to exist. It's in your hard wallet. It's not even an exchange. And nobody has access to your hard wallet except you.
So you advocate
it's the ultimate insurance policy.
You think people should have a hard wallet with some money?
It's irresponsible to not have a hard wallet with some Bitcoin because it's your ultimate insurance policy. If the world goes tits up and there's chaos, mm-hmm. and there's everybody becomes like governments just become tyrannical, mm-hmm. and just freeze your bank accounts, like we saw in Canada, for example, for a moment, right? They just freeze your bank accounts because you were at a protest that the government didn't like, or let's say you're caught up in this like nasty situation in litigation, and they freeze your property, or they put a lien against your property. Bad things could happen to you for not good reasons, for political reasons or legal reasons, but nobody could touch your Bitcoin in a hard wallet ever.
And do you think Bitcoin is going to stick around as that store of value for like decades, or do you think that it might be replaced by other?
No, Bitcoin will always exist. It's the mother coin.
And what about Ethereum?
Ethereum has a very bright future. Absolutely. Ethereum has a bright future. I'll tell you why. Because Bitcoin is just simply a store of value, but Ethereum has something called smart contracts. And smart contracts is very interesting. It creates a situation where you have if-then statements. So I could program the Ethereum software to say, if something happens, if A happens, then B happens. So if you come up to me and say, hey, Samir, I'd like to raise $1 million for my film. I say, okay, if you raise $500,000, I'll give you the other half. So I will program it so that when Tao raises that first $500,000, automatically through a smart contract, the other half comes to you right away. Don't need a lawyer to do that. It's a program. It replaces a contract. That's why lawyers are very scared of Ethereum. So you can't do that with Bitcoin. You can't program Bitcoin, but you can program Ethereum. And so you could rewrite the entire financial system through the Ethereum ecosystem and software. So that's pretty interesting and really exciting for me. So I think Ethereum has a very bright future.
And so where would you like to see like the world of crypto and the way it's like integrated into everyday life in the year 2035? Do you have any is there an ideal world scenario that you're pointing towards, that you would like, using your work and power that you've accrued in this world to kind of nudge the world towards? Well,
with respect to Bitcoin, I hope that we provide an example to the industry, and I think we have, that you could mine Bitcoin in a clean, responsible way. Now the industry, every time they mine Bitcoin, this issue always comes up. Are you doing it this way? Are you doing it in a clean fashion? And that wasn't discussed a year ago.
Right.
And so very proud of that, and how people are now very aware. These large-scale Bitcoin miners that we compete with are very aware and shamed if they're not doing it in a responsible way. So that to me is already success. But with respect to what happens 2035, I'm kind of scared of the future. I feel like there's a bit of dystopia going on. I think this whole thing that happened with COVID was really scary.
Yeah.
And I think,
like, in the sense that it could have been so much worse, and it could be in the future, or
I just think like our freedoms are not as protected as I think we are. I think things can really turn quickly. And so people have to think, by having Bitcoin in their hard wallet, it's your ultimate way. It's your protection against government tyranny. And I think government tyranny is not a conspiracy theory. I think it could happen really quickly. We've seen what happened with Corona. You saw what governments did really quickly. And people use health scare as a way to take away your freedoms really quickly. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about the whole COVID-19 thing, but I do know one thing, that people gave up their freedom really fast.
Right.
Because of fear.
Right.
It was a little too fast for my liking. And like I said in the beginning of this interview, freedom is my ultimate value. So
this is so your entire commitment to crypto is as a kind of hedge against taking freedom away from you.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks, Samir. This was a really wide-ranging discussion, and it's good to get to know you like this. Thank you. Well, I think we could have more of these conversations.
Yeah,
but this
totally.
is a good start.
Thanks,
Thank you, brother.